Welcome to this presentation on business processes, where we'll study how to increase the value of resources by means of actions. We'll start by looking into exchange processes, that is, processes where some resource is transferred from one actor to another. The first question to ask about an exchange process is, what is transferred? What kind of object is transferred? For example, what do you get when you buy a book at a bookstore? Well, one natural answer would be, I get a book. But let us take one more related question. What do you get when you borrow a book at a library? A natural answer would again be, I get a book. But now it looks a bit fishy. We have two very different questions, but we get the same answer to them. So the answer can't be that good. It's too general and vague. We need a more precise answer. In order to find a better answer, we should think about what we can do, what we are allowed to do when we have bought or borrowed a book. If we buy a book, we have the right to do almost anything with it. We can read it, sell it, or even destroy it. But if we only borrow the book, we are much more restricted in what we can do with it. Essentially, we have only got the right to read the book for some period of time. Here is a small exercise to get a feeling for what kinds of rights that are common in transfers. The first question is, what do you get when you borrow a DVD? Typically, you get the right to view it privately, but you may not view it publicly, in a school or hospital, for example, and you may not sell the DVD. If you buy a DVD, you get the right to view it privately, and you can sell the disc, but you can't show it publicly, and you're not allowed to distribute the contents of the DVD on the internet. If you buy a bus ticket, you get the right to make a trip by bus, and the ticket is not personal, so you have the right to sell it to someone else. But if you buy an air ticket, on the other hand, the ticket is personal, so you can't sell it to someone else. These examples illustrate that what you get in a transfer is one or several rights on some resource, and it's not always that easy to tell what the rights are. Having a right on a resource means to be entitled to use it or benefit from it in some way, to do something with it. What rights that can exist on a resource depends on the resource itself as well as on its type. There are different rights for physical objects than for information objects, for example. Thus, it would be pointless to try to give a complete classification of all possible rights. However, there are three broad categories that capture most rights. There are use rights, rights to use resources in different ways, for example, to read a book, to copy a file, to eat a meal, or to drive a car. There are income rights, rights to earn income from resources, for example, to rent a house or to lend DVDs. And there are transfer rights, rights to transfer resources to other agents, such as selling a book or licensing software. This figure shows how we can model transfers. The first example is about a reader who buys a book at a bookstore. The model is viewed from the reader's perspective, so the economic event is an increment, as the reader gets a right on the economic resource, the book. In other words, the book becomes more valuable for the reader because she gets rights on it. We have indicated what right she gets by labeling the association between the economic event buy and the economic resource book, and it's an ownership right. The second example is about a reader borrowing a book from a library. The structure of the model is exactly as before, but the label for the rights now says that there is a use right, a right to read the book. This slide illustrates how we can increase the value some resource has for someone. Suppose that a person sees a nice car at a car rental company. Before renting the car, it really has no value for him because he can't use it, he can't drive it, he can't lend it to his friends, and so on. But when he rents the car, it becomes more valuable for him, because now he can use it for some period of time. Suppose he really likes the car and decides to buy it. Now the car becomes even more valuable for him, because he gets more rights to it. He gets all the ownership rights, including transfer rights, so he can sell the car. Now, when he owns the car, what can he do to make it even more valuable for him? Well, he could change some property, some feature of the car. Maybe he would prefer the car to have another color. By painting the car, he changes the color feature and thereby makes the car more valuable for him. Generalizing, we see that a person can increase the value a resource has for him in two ways. First, he can get more rights to the resource, so he can use it in more ways. And secondly, he can change some features of the resource so it better fits his preferences. In both cases, the resource will become more valuable for him. A few words about features. A feature of a resource is any of its properties, characteristics, or associations. The simplest cases are physical features, for example, the size or weight or mineral content of a pizza. A feature is anything that can be stated about the resource. We can now summarize the possible relationships between economic events and economic resources. We call such relationships stock flow relationships, and they describe how an economic event affects the rights and features of an economic resource. Here is an example where a person buys a car from a car dealer. The economic event is buy, and the economic resource is car, and the stock flow relationship between these two is called take, because it says that the person gets more rights on the car. The person takes rights on the car. Note that in these models we always take the perspective of a certain economic agent. Here we have taken the perspective of the person. So the stock flow relationship becomes take, as it is the person who gets or takes the rights. Furthermore, from the person's perspective, the economic event becomes an increment, because buying the car makes it more valuable for him, as he gets more rights on it. The economic event buy increases the value of the car for him. A stock flow relationship describes how an economic event affects an economic resource from a certain agent's perspective. There are 5 kinds of stock flow relationships, and we can position them with respect to 2 dimensions. The first is whether the economic event is an increment or a decrement event from the agent's perspective. Does it decrease value for the agent? Then it's a decrement event. Does it increase value? Then it's an increment event. The second dimension is whether the event affects rights or features. The first stock flow relationship is give, which means that an agent gives up some right on a resource. So it's a decrement event and it affects rights. The second stock flow relationship is take, meaning that an agent gets or takes rights on some resource. So it's an increment event affecting rights. Produce means that the event produces a new resource or improves an existing resource. So it's an increment event affecting features. There are 2 decrement events affecting features. The first one is use, which means that some resource is being used in an economic event. But after the event, the resource still exists and can be used